Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast.
The idea to cross the ape man with the Anunnaki. Slaves, work animals, created for one person to unburden the gods.
So we're good to go. There's a little bit of a lag on my microphone, so I'm going to try and fix that now. Before we get into it, I would just like to take this moment to thank all of you who have been with me on this journey, especially from the start, as it's taken many unexpected turns. For those who remember, it started out as an ecological podcast about homesteading and different various subjects about that, and then we went into Mesopotamia. Now we're on to a different subject. So I just really appreciate those of you who have stuck by me and still find it interesting and entertaining. It really means quite a lot, and the fact that I can post this on Hive and that people are actually listening is really quite amazing. So I wanted to say thank you very, very much. Patient Zero, Revised Sociology, obviously, Rondon. And Snecky, I'm not sure I've seen you here before, but if I haven't forgotten, thank you very much as well. And really, just wanted to take a moment to say this. It's another change that we're sort of going through, and I'm that kind of a person. I have been all my life. I like many very different, wide variety of subjects, and usually get very deep into something for a certain period of time and then move on to something else. So it means a lot having people along with me for the journey. So thank you. Yes, wonderful to see you here on time, and please feel free to doze on and off throughout. I know I certainly do. But okay, enough of this emotional jibber jabber. Why don't we start moving forward with the episode? Because as usual, I have quite a lot that we can cover. We'll see what we make. I said this a few episodes already, but I'll reiterate once again for those who don't know. This episode and the following few is going to be a sort of an introduction. It's an introduction to Drunvelo Melchizedek's world, cosmos, which is rather different from Sitchin's. And instead of just sort of plowing through a narrative or starting to go through the book that he's written that we're going to be dealing with later, I thought it best to sort of cover some of the basic concepts and really try and build this world. It's a term that I've heard from screenwriting, from film. The first thing you have to do is you have to build the world that the film is in, so that people know what the rules are, both physics and social rules, and sort of start to get a feel for this environment, and especially if this reality is different from what we recognize as reality. So I know that a lot of the people who listen to this are very much in tune with a lot of these subjects, and I'm sure I'm not going to be going too far off into the deep end to begin with, but still to make sure we're all on the same page, to make sure we all mean the same when we're using these words, it's always best to start by defining the terms. Those who are with me from the start will remember. Okay. So I wanted to actually start from what we spoke last week, which was I mentioned a little bit about dimensions. And this is a term that's very, problematic in the sense that it has many different interpretations. In fact, the very word has many different fields where it can mean different things, from computer and different sciences all the way to, mysticism and New Age theories. And so we mentioned last week that when we speak about dimensions, what we really mean is different frequencies of reality that we can tune into. And as we tune into these different frequencies, we actually experience reality differently. So when we use the term dimensions, what we really mean is different parts of the same grand reality that we are tuning into at that specific moment. And this can be any number of things. We could think of it very, very practically and simply, in the sense that my emotions, my mindset, the way I feel right now is going to influence my reality to a certain degree. And so whether or not if I'm drunk on hallucinogenics or uppers, or even whether I'm depressed or excited or fearful, that's going to change. It's going to change the way that my environment looks, the feeling that I get from the environment, etc. So all the way from the very, very purely sort of common sense, very common experience that we all have, where my mind state influences the reality that I experience, and then going all the way to what we were speaking about last week, which is, the ability to experience it without a physical body, to experience a non-physical reality, an ethereal plane, as it were. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's a sort of small beginning. Now, throughout this, also, if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like to add, please feel free to post in chat, and I do occasionally try to get through any questions that we have and continue. So the next subject that I wanted to approach might be a little bit of a sharp left turn, but I believe it does very much connect, and that's the subject of Taoism. Now, those who've been here from the start will know this isn't the first time that I mention my personal, shall I say, religion or philosophy or whatever you want to call it, but it's something that I truly believe in very, very deeply and has helped me in my life. The reason I bring it up is because of the religions or of the cosmologies that I know, it's one that bears the closest relationship to science and to a certain branch of science that's very, very important for our sake. And so Taoism is based, there's a huge, vast amount of information that is, under this cloak of Taoism, from alchemy and different physical practices to kung fu to philosophical teachings to, handwritten scrolls, etc., etc. But we're going to be talking about the very, very, very basic cosmology that Taoism pertains. And that is that at the beginning of creation, of all that is, there was complete unity. And this state of unity was the state that we know as Tai Chi. Forgive my pronunciation, but most of us have heard the term. Now, Tai Chi is the absolute balance of opposites. And so within the unity, there was this state which seems to be prior to Tai Chi, where nothing can be said, as it were, because it's complete unity. And then there is this state of not separation, but individuation within the whole. And that's before the separation actually happens. That is the state of Tai Chi, where there are two opposites. There is individuation, and yet the two opposites are completely whole with each other and in complete balance. That's the second phase that we speak of. And then the third phase is the separation. And that's the separation of the two opposites, which in Chinese are called yin and yang. And this act of separation is really the beginning of creation and of reality as we know it. Now, a small side note which is interesting, this theory, although very simplistic and obviously quite poetic, as it were, does bear a lot of relation to the Big Bang Theory, which claims that all matter in the universe, or all energy in the universe, I should say, was condensed to a single point, as in was unified. Where in space it was is hard to say, but let's just say for the moment that it was complete unity. And then there was the Big Bang, and that Big Bang was a separation. Now, obviously, according to science, there wasn't a separation into two base elements or energies, but nonetheless, there is an act of separating from the unity that was necessary to begin the process of creation, to begin this reality that we exist in. So just interesting that there is a correlation. Crimson Clad. I see. Okay, well, we'll be here waiting for you if you can make it, and if not, there's always the upload. But thank you very much for posting. Glad to hear from you. So, this concept of yin and yang, which, by the way, just for general knowledge, yin is the dark side, the north side of a mountain, and yang is the south side or the light side of the mountain. That's the original terms yin and yang, and they symbolize exactly that, the light and the dark, the two polar opposites. And this is really what we want to talk about for our case in point. The concept of having these two polar opposites as the two basic, ingredients or base elements. And then from this separation of two, from 1 to 2, the Chinese extrapolated further. And then each of those 2 was separated into another 2. And so now we have 4. And they were called lesser yin and lesser yang, and greater yin and greater yang. And these represented 4 different stages, which were obviously based still on the yin-yang concept, but were a further abstraction, a further extrapolation from that original idea. And this is a curious subject which we could go very, very further into. But for those of you who are astute, you might notice that what the series seems to be suggesting is that we are going from 1 to 2 to 4. And if we continue that process once again, we reach 8, where we divide each one into 2 once again. This is a sequence which is very familiar, I think, to most of us today, at least by name, which is the binary sequence, simply doubling the last number. So 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. This is the system that's used for computers, as we know, for memory and all these other things. And in fact, it's the binary system that we all have heard about and know and our lives really depend on, at least today. Now, the funny thing is, not many people know that Leibniz, the original, I'm not sure if inventor or discoverer of the binary system, actually got the idea, at least inspiration to a certain degree, from the Taoist book, which is called the I Ching. And the I Ching is a structure which is taking this binary sequence of taking 1, dividing it into 2, and then dividing those into 2 and those into 2, and creating an entire, both mathematical and claims to be, shall I say, oracle system for divining many, many different things. And the book of Changes, the I Ching, is very, very, very famous in China and very important to them culturally. So just curious that our binary system that powered up all of our computer technological advancements, basically the world that we know. My podcast is, powered by so many different binary sequences, all stems from this very, very, very ancient system, which is another binary system, which wasn't used electrically or electronically, but was nonetheless used as a very, very simple method for reaching very, very complex results in a very simple process. So I could talk for ages about Taoism, about Yin-Yang, and about the I Ching, but I'm going to try and steer away from them for now, although we will get back into it. The I Ching is in fact something that Drunvelo Melchizedek talks about, and it's a very interesting subject in itself. But we'll move on for now, and we see that this whole thing has actually brought us into the world of the binary. Now, I talk a lot about binary and the binary sequence in our life because in my personal experience, a lot of our reality is binary. And when I say binary, what I mean is it's made up of coupled opposites. One of the best examples for this, for me at least, is our language. Now, obviously, our language isn't simply binary or polar in and of itself, but the way that our language is structured and the way that words work normally is with these opposite pairs that sort of come together and explain each other, as it were, necessary points to compare and to understand. I'm not going to go into it anymore now because it's not relevant to what we're talking about. If you want, think about it in your lives if you've never considered the attempt to explain something as not either or, whether it's both or whether it's neither, but a lot of our language depends on us choosing one of the binary options and defining with that. Okay, so among the various systems which use binary, and by the way, Go, the game of Go, is another excellent example of that. But among them, as we've mentioned before, is computer electronics. And before computer electronics, I should say, or prior to, there is another force which is binary, which is electricity, or really electromagnetism. Now, electromagnetism, as most of us are aware, is polar, as it were. Doesn't have to be, but we won't get into that now. But most of the electricity that we use is has two poles, a positive and a negative. The same, obviously, with magnets. These two forces are really two representations of a unified force called electromagnetism. So I'm pretty interested in electromagnetism, and I think it's worth talking about a little bit because as such a common force in our lives, many people don't seem to quite understand. And in fact, it's probably one of the more mysterious forces that we come into contact with, and many, I think, electrical engineers and scientists don't fully understand. So it's worth, I think, focusing a little bit on it because it seems to me, and this is backed obviously by other people, but I do feel that electricity, electromagnetism, is the key to blending the two worlds of science and, let's say, magic or New Age or spiritualism. But I like the word magic. I think it's good. The single force that I can see time and time again that is recognized and appreciated, though with very different terms, in both of these very distinct worlds, in the world of science and academia and in the world of magic, is this force which is electromagnetism, which really we call, not we, but the New Age movement calls energy. And so, just to clarify, I hope this isn't getting too boring as a subject that most people know already, but it's important to note that when we say electromagnetism, we're not simply talking about electricity or magnets. We're talking about light, and we're talking about sound, and we're talking about our senses, and indeed our whole nervous system. Our bodies run on electricity, as does every living thing. It truly is the energy of life, or at least part of it. When something dies, one of the ways to sort of measure or to see when something is dead is when there is no more electrical activity, obviously specifically in the brain, but there is in the heart as well. So this force of nature, which we are so familiar with, we've all had batteries and we all know to put it in and it turns things on, is really in charge of all of the reality that we experience in the way that we know. And so when we experience with our five senses, that is electrical, what we would call digital information that's being passed on to a processor, as it were, to read the information and decrypt it so that it makes sense. That's basically what our brains do, and that's basically what we do when we are faced with the world. So when we talk about electromagnetism, we're not talking just about the batteries or powering up objects. We're talking about the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is all the energy that we know. So, for example, heat as well. All of these different magnetic radiations and magnetic fields, radio signals, etc. All of these come under the same term of electromagnetism. And so this really brings me to my next point rather well, I think, which is we have to talk about consciousness. Now, we've obviously touched on various subjects that are related to it, and we can see where we're going, but it's still important to note what we mean by consciousness, and almost as importantly, what are the limitations of consciousness? Where does consciousness end? So I think this is a very big question, and I'd like to remind that we are not here to define reality. We're here to define terms. And so we're not saying what consciousness is. I'm saying what I mean when I say the word consciousness. So this isn't really a debate. This is merely a dictionary, as it were. Now, there are many, to start talking about what consciousness is in a 1 hour podcast where we have 40 minutes left is a bit silly, but let's do it nonetheless. Consciousness comes from the word conscious, obviously. And to be conscious of something means to be aware. But when we think of consciousness, we don't usually limit it just to our awareness. So we say that we have a subconscious, but we often include that subconscious as part of our consciousness. So, this is already getting very confusing, but it is important to distinguish between our part that is aware, the part that I'm using to talk with you, to think about what I want to say, to plan these, the part that is thinking inside my brain in words, saying this, no, that, the other, etc. That's my conscious brain. And then the subconscious, as we know, is all of those parts that I'm unaware of. Now, again, we're getting into a bit of a problem, because what if I become aware of parts of my subconscious? When does it cross that threshold, between subconscious and conscious? And we obviously have many different states that seem to be, on the verge of both, dreamlike states, etc. So when I use the term consciousness, what I'm referring to is the entirety of the human experience. And yet, within that, there is a distinction between our consciousness and, let's say, our physical body. So I think it's important here to spend a moment to talk about the relationship between our consciousness and the physical body. Okay, here's the best way that I can define it to explain what I'm trying to say here. I really love the model of the human antenna, because it just makes a lot of sense to me if we're talking about electromagnetism again. When we have a radio and we turn it on, it plays music from some channel that's playing somewhere. It seems to our immediate experience that the music is somehow in the radio, that the radio is generating the actual music. But in fact, as we know, the radio is simply channeling the music. It has an antenna which is designed to pick up, and the radio waves are everywhere, all across the universe. And we are simply picking up something that is permeating everything and translating that into something that we can experience. Now, this same model obviously is very famous to be suitable for the human consciousness model. And that is to say that unlike what most scientists claim today, and especially atheists, the brain itself does not generate consciousness. Now, again, this is a very difficult statement, but we will progress. And if anyone has any questions, objections, etc., you're more than welcome to offer as I go along. But let's think about this for one moment. Why do we think the brain generates consciousness? Because consciousness begins and ends with the brain. There is no consciousness before there is a brain, and once the brain is gone, there is no consciousness still. But what we're saying there is that we don't experience consciousness before or after there is a brain. But we don't experience the radio waves either, and yet scientifically, empirically, we can measure them and we can prove that they're there, even though we don't experience them. So would this be relevant to consciousness? Well, a very curious question would be, where is consciousness? If it's generated by the brain, we can measure all these things that are generated. Where is the consciousness itself inside the brain? And whenever brain scientists have tried and are still trying to map the brain's functions, I think that the study of phrenology began with really mapping simply areas of the brain saying this is in charge of anger, this is in charge of whatever. If a person has an enlarged, swollen part of the brain there, then that means he is such and such. But that has been completely disproven. And in fact, from injured brains, we know that brains are tremendously plastic. In the sense that they are flexible. And if there is a brain injury, then a brain can use different parts to take up different jobs and to do things that that part isn't supposed to do. From people who lost their ability to speak to being able to use different parts of their brain to speak, and various very, very interesting, curious experiments that have gone on throughout history. And so it seems that the brain is a non-localized activity. It doesn't necessarily have one place that is in charge of a specific act, but rather, as we can see time and time again, and we now know from computer neural networks, it is a network. It is a network of neurons with a very delicate balance that is firing at unbelievable speeds, and this whole network is working together to produce this experience, this, human consciousness, as it were. Now, I say produce with reservation, but it's just to make it easier to explain right now. So, if that is the case, then where is the consciousness itself? It seems that we can't find the exact position in the same way that many of the brain's functions, we can't attach it to a single point. It seems to arise from the brain's activity as a whole. And again, if we were looking for the radio signals inside a radio, we would be met with the same problem. We can certainly see where they come from. They come from the speaker, where we experience them from. The radio waves are coming from the speaker, but that's after it's been processed through the radio. So the origination of the radio waves poses the same sort of mystery as consciousness, which is why it's very encouraging to think that possibly our consciousness is not something that is solely existing with a brain, that solely comes into being when a brain is created, born, and leaves after it dies, but rather it is only expressed in a way that we can experience it when there is a brain. But what about when there isn't that brain? That same consciousness, which we could all experience before, now becomes, as the radio waves do, outside of our spectrum of experience, outside of the range of our senses, and so we can no longer experience it. Now, this obviously could be a very crazy thought for some of you, and I hope I haven't lost too many going through it. But the more I thought about this, and I can't remember the first time I heard, but the more I sort of learned how the brain works and what we thought and what we think today about the brain, it seemed to make a lot more sense to think of the brain as a vehicle. The brain is the machine that can help consciousness interact with our physical everyday reality. And in fact, this is, to a certain degree, but this is the world that Drunvelo encourages us to believe in, I guess. All of this is entirely theoretical so far, because for me personally, in my journey towards these subjects and towards these things, I went purely analytically and non-experientially. However, I've met many people, and Drunvelo himself, and in time, I myself also have had experiences which seem to point to this as the more plausible option, which seems to be that the other explanation, that the brain is generating the consciousness and the consciousness can't leave the brain, seems to be lacking in the explanation. And indeed, out-of-body experiences are a good example of this. There aren't many, but there are a few cases where people have been privy to information that they physically couldn't be aware of. Obviously, if someone says that they hear something on the surgeon's table during surgery when they're under anesthetic, their ears could still be working, they could still be picking up on the signals. But if they can read a random number that's printed in a sealed envelope on a shelf on top of where they're sleeping, then that seems to be something much harder to fake, as it were. So even without going to any of the people who claim to have experienced this consciousness separate or outside of the brain, when we think about it with what we know of technology today, with what we know of how the brain works, how electromagnetism works, how energy and the energy in our body works, it seems to be a much more plausible explanation than I think once would have been perceived. So, if I dare say for one moment, and I'm not sure if how much we'll be doing this, but I think it's a good idea to not forget what we've spoken about with Sitchin until now. I believe this is a curious point that can sort of connect the two. And I won't go into it very deeply right now, but the idea of the brain being the physical vessel that is required to inhabit, to contain consciousness, or to allow consciousness to be expressed, as it were. What is this theory, basically? It means a lot of different things, but one of the more important ones is that it claims that consciousness preceded the brain, the physical body, that consciousness, the ethereal part of our being, came first, and it was only later that a physical body was available to contain it. Now, this is obviously a very difficult claim, as it also brings with it a lot of different problems that can come from that, but it also provides us with a very unique point of view, I feel, which is we are only aware to a certain degree, but we are only aware and we only live our lives, as it were, in this physical dimension, in this third dimension that we all know. And we have no memory of what came before, and we have no knowledge of what will come after. That sentence is not necessarily true, but let's start as that beginning statement, even though I don't believe in it myself. What this means really is that if consciousness exists outside of the brain before we are born and after we die, we as our conscious part, as our aware part, are not aware of it. And the question becomes why? What possible reason, what logic would there be for this separation in experience between consciousness separate from brain, consciousness outside of the body, and our everyday physical experience? So I'm not going to answer that question in full. I hope, I know that I throw a lot of these little nuggets. I really do believe that we will touch on all of them by the end, even though I can't say I've got a detailed list of every time I said we'll get back to that. But I promise you that we will be going deeper and deeper into these subjects right now. I'm trying to get a sort of very basic understanding of what we're talking about and not go too deeply into the deep end. Hello, Sideways Photon. Great to see you again. You've got an excellent name for this episode. So, one of the reasons that could be suggested, and that I personally think, is that there is a certain experience, which is the third dimensional physical experience, that is inaccessible without a physical body. So, if we saw our lives here, as I think many of us do, as a sort of lesson or a teaching, something that we have come here to experience, to grow, to learn from, then it could make sense that we think of our physical experience as very separate from our non-physical experience, because it's within a certain realm of the physical lessons that we are here to learn, the physical experiences that we are here to experience. What this would mean is that if there is meaning to it, and if there is a reason for this, that physical experience that we have, which we call life, must have an effect, a lasting effect, on our non-physical being, on our consciousness, as it were. So, this opens up a new area to delve into, which is really where I was trying to head with this, which is what I term spiritual evolution. And I think it is a famous concept. I'm not sure if that specific phrasing, but it's something that a lot of people, to a certain degree, have thought about, talk about. But for our intents and purposes, I think it specifically relates to what we are discussing, which is we all know what physical evolution, human evolution, biological evolution is, and we all know to a certain degree how much it affects us and has shaped who we are, how we behave, etc. This theory suggests that our conscious self, our consciousness, is going through another process of evolution, of advancement, of change, of growth, of learning that is sort of outside of the physical body. And for me, at least, this would, first of all, if there is an outside consciousness, the other option would be that it was completely static and unchanging. And since there is nothing that we know of in the universe that is completely static and unchanging, it would make sense that there is this element of change to it. And so, Soundwave, I think I'm a materialist, reductionist when it comes to consciousness. There is no consciousness without brain. Excellent. I think you came halfway through, right? So I'm afraid you missed the whole beginning, working my way up towards consciousness without a brain, but we'll carry on for now. I invite you to come and re-listen to the upload afterwards if you want to catch what you missed. But at the end of the episode, I'm going to leave, you know what, we're almost there now. So very, very soon, I'm going to leave some times for you to question. No need to apologize. I apologize that I won't be going over it again so that people listening won't have to listen to me repeat myself. So let's just wrap this up because I can see the time is pressing on, and this seems to be a good place for us to conclude. We're going to go into it more over the coming episodes, and this concept of spiritual evolution is a very important one because it bears a lot of the answers to the discrepancies between Sitchin's world and Drunvelo Melchizedek's. And maybe I'll just give a few small sentences. I hope this isn't, for one thing, too cryptic and going too deep, but I think we've established enough to say, if you've followed me this far, what I'm suggesting, what Sitchin and Drunvelo Melchizedek suggest, is that the human body was on Earth to an evolutionary degree, which we call apes. And this was true, obviously. To this day, there are certain animals that hold a body that is remarkably similar to ours and especially to our ancestors. And yet it seems that there was a great physical evolution, which we discussed, which Sitchin pointed to, both in the brain development and in general in the characteristics that seem to come with the human experience. Standing up on two legs, using your hands, having your head much higher. All of these things which point to a much more mental, abstract capacity. Obviously, I'm not saying that the two aren't connected, and the fact that our physical evolution allowed us to do that, and also the fact that we were using our brains more, encouraged the physical evolution. But I want to talk specifically about how it connects to the spiritual evolution, which is to say, if we can imagine that the human consciousness, which might not have been called human, but the consciousness that we think of as human was in existence before the physical body, then our claim would be that the human consciousness was needed to wait, as it were, because the ape body was not yet a complex enough structure in order to hold this very complex consciousness. So if we'll go back for a moment to the analogy with the radio, we can imagine having, I'm not sure if this will work exactly, but let's say having a very simple radio. And in fact, this radio can only pick up, AM frequencies, okay? A ham radio, I think it is. I'm not sure. If we're using a more advanced technology, let's say FM radios, then this lesser developed radio won't be able to pick up that signal. In order for that signal to become present in a way that we can experience it, we need a more advanced machine, a more advanced radio to be able to interact with it. And this is really the theory of what we're talking about. The Anunnaki actually did to the physical body. It was not just a physical, biological change to allow things like reproduction, but it was also a physical change, let's say, to the brain's capacity and to the physical body, and indeed we'll talk about later the chakra system, in order to allow the human consciousness to be expressed through it. So since the human consciousness was more complex than an ape's consciousness, for example, the body was not yet developed enough in order to provide it. And this was really part of what was necessary to happen before the human consciousness as we know it was able to manifest here on Earth. Okay, 41. That's pretty good. Let's have a look and see in chat. Are there any questions about what I just said? Because that might have been a little bit too much too quick. Materialist reductionist sounds about if you Swoop. Oh, Swoop, I keep forgetting it's you. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Everyone calls you Swoop, but I still call you by your new name. But it's just very fitting for this episode, Soundwaves Photon. I like it. Okay, we've got a little while longer. The next subject is actually a big one. It's the chakra system, so I think we're going to save that for next week. As for now, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this this whole paradigm, because it is a tricky one, and I know that there is a lot that seems downright impossible, because in our personal experience, and indeed for a long time in my personal experience, there's no evidence for this whatsoever. And in fact, there seems to be a lot of evidence to contradict it, since there is yet, very, very little that we can tell about people who have died and come back. And I personally have researched that a lot and have read many different books about the subject. And if you've never heard about people, obviously most people who die and come back experience nothing and are simply blackout. And some of the people who experience something either very, very sort of personal, whether it's, their own personal savior appearing, or whether it's, a bright light or whatever. But there are some descriptions of people which go into tremendous detail. And one of the themes that keeps coming up with certain people, and again, not with everyone and not even with the majority, is that people describe after they sort of died as being approached and asked whether they would like to come back. And then those who are telling the story obviously said yes. And it seems that many of these instances were with people who had families who were, who they were important and who really wanted to come back for other people. That seems to be a deciding factor. Now, whether or not these people are crazy or invented it is irrelevant. What is interesting to think about, I think personally, is this idea that death is a very curious, again, point. If we say, when is someone actually dead? When they stop reacting with reality in any way, let's say on a very deep level, let's say their eyes are non-responsive, etc., there are no reflexes either, they're still not dead. We can say they're not necessarily dead. They can be in a coma, which means that the brain is working on a very, very low level, but there is no interaction with the physical world. So this again is a very strange, position to hold as to why our body is doing that. Under the coma, some people have also expressed that they've experienced different states, different dreamlike states, different realities that for them felt tremendously real at the time. And in fact, there have been quite a few films about that subject of people in a coma. And yet we don't seem to know exactly how it works. Some comas people snap out of after 30 years, and some people deteriorate. So claiming that life, as it were, and consciousness is completely related to the brain's electrical signals is a very iffy statement. And defining at what point someone is dead for sure is also iffy. So that's why we have these cases of people who were clinically dead for a certain amount of time. Now, as some of you may know, it actually takes the brain quite a while when it's a natural death, obviously not a bullet to the brain, but when it's a natural death, it takes the systems a while to sort of shut down. So again, this is a very curious process. Why is it that our brains and our bodies need to shut down? A very simple comparison, when I shut down my clock, as it were, it just goes off. It just cuts the power. But when I shut down my computer, it sort of has all of these processes that it goes through before shutting down completely. And if we listen to the experiences that certain people have expressed when they die, of out-of-body experiences of leaving their bodies, seeing their loved ones around them, seeing different things, it again becomes curious that as the body is shutting down, as the physical brain is dying out, there are these electrical impulses that seem to be moving and seem to be firing off at this point as the body knows that it's sort of dying. And in fact, once someone is dead, they seem to be able to come back to life, and the people sometimes, as it were, who have experienced this have expressed that they felt they left their body, had this question posed of whether they want to, decided to come back, and then they felt themselves return to their body. And the instant that they entered into their body again, they wake up, or their heart starts beating, their body seems to be revived quite mysteriously. So again, these are a lot of sort of iffy and new age hippy dippy, like I'm fully aware of how this sounds, and I'm again still not here to convince anyone of anything. But when you put all of these different curiosities, all of these different coinkydinks together, they seem to be painting a picture. And when I think of the model of when a person is born, they come out into existence from nothing, and when they die, they disappear out of existence. That doesn't fit any other model of the universe that we know. We know that energy is not created or destroyed, it transforms. And everything is energy, including ourselves, and we know that our consciousness to a certain degree is electrical or electrochemical. So why is it that when it comes to our own experience, we seem to take this different approach, where it's, clear-cut, reductionist, etc., etc.? Okay, so just a few thoughts on the subject. Let's see. Swoop. Let's see. Check out Stuart Hameroff's work with Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose, yeah, quantum. I didn't go very deeply into them, but I did. I think I read one of their books. Roger Penrose. I haven't heard of Stuart Hameroff, but yes, quantum mechanics in general is a very interesting subject because it's been so, taken over by the New Age society. And I include myself among them. But it's a very curious cage where science is having a difficult time convincing all of these hippies that that's not what they meant. Also, Robert Anton Wilson. Oh, I love Robert Anton Wilson. Quantum Psychology. Yes. I don't think I've heard of that book of his. Quantum Psychology. I will definitely check it out. I love Robert Anton Wilson. I heard more of his lectures than read his books. But he's very interesting. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend him as well. I mean, he talks a lot about consciousness and these subjects as well, but from a very different point of view. Okay, we won't go into him too much now. I was gonna get sidetracked again, but we'll stay on point. Let's see. For the last 10 minutes, I don't know if nobody talks in chat, if that means that you're all riveted and completely in 100% agreement and just waiting on the edge of your seat for my next word to come out, or if you've mostly fallen asleep and couldn't be bothered to argue with me over the points. Either is completely acceptable, and just having you here is good enough. But if you do have any questions or any debates, then please feel free. I'm the complete opposite of a hippie, but I'll read anything. Wow, you know what? That is, there is nothing more that I could ask if you'll read or become aware of others' opinions. Um, the opposite of a hippie, yeah. I mean, what is a hippie? I think I'm too weird to be a hippie. I think hippies are a little less extreme than some of my ideas. So I don't know what I am. I guess I'm the opposite of people, what they see in me, as it were. So it'd be interesting. I mean, when I say about this, I heard a very interesting lecture about quantum mechanics, which was entirely the mathematics of it. So this was no experiments, no hidden cameras, none of the photon, cannons, purely the mathematics of it. And within the mathematics of it, when he was explaining, and I know nothing almost about mathematics, and I didn't understand nearly anything that he said, but from what little I managed to gather, he was talking about both the quantum entanglement and indeed the sort of quantum level of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and these different sort of phenomenons that we've all come to hear from New Age hippies, really being more mathematical abstractions than real world experiences. Which is entirely what we always said, because the quantum realm is not an experiential realm for us, at least our bodies. We won't talk about machines and what they can do, but in terms of where this stuff is happening, it's definitely happening in more of an abstract than a physical realm. But nonetheless, what he was talking about was a lot of the confusion came from not differentiating between the abstract mathematical model and the real world events. And so, if we consider what happens in the quantum realm happening on the Newtonian level, as it were, it would be pretty scary. Things randomly appearing and disappearing and spinning and, changing position, not going through linear space. But that obviously doesn't happen because there are very, very different physical rules for each. And a lot of the sort of hype that's been built up around quantum mechanics, he claims, comes from this confusion of thinking that, well, if it happens on the quantum level, then surely, it can happen on the real level. I wouldn't say that, I don't disagree with him because he's talking about maths. I would say that I disagree with him definitely about the nature of reality. It's just that quantum mechanics seems to be it's a very, very high level of maths and theoretical physics, and it's difficult to sort of take that and really honestly for me to tell you, how that relates to human consciousness, etc. So I wouldn't say that he's mistaken in what he's claiming. But at the same time, quantum mechanics, even if it's not a physical representation, is an excellent metaphor, an excellent model, in the same way that I talk about electricity and radios, to understand something about the world and something about reality and consciousness, etc. Oh yes, I will definitely check out Wilson's Quantum Psychology. Nice. You've definitely convinced me now. Yes, I will check it out after the show. I'm just looking for something good to read, and I'm interested in both quantum and psychology, so that's good. Okay, so we've got about 6 minutes left. I'll just go over. Do we have a show afterwards with Krim? I don't know if the power is going to not to prevent you from having a show. Let me know, Rondon or Krim, whoever's listening to this. So next week, we're going to be talking about the chakra system. Now, again, each of these, electromagnetism, consciousness, Taoism, chakra system, each of these is a subject for a podcast in and of itself. So I do no justice to these subjects by bringing them up here, 4 or 5 in an hour. My point is that we will be touching on the surface, and as the episodes flow by, we'll be going deeper and deeper into these subjects and understanding them more and more. Because honestly, really and truly, you don't need more than electromagnetism. If you absolutely understood electromagnetism, then everything else would make sense. No, I'm only half joking, but it's certainly, each of these subjects in and of itself is really a huge topic that can provide us with enough information. So we're going to start building up our dictionary. We're going to start getting a feel for what these terms mean for us, for our intents and purposes. And as we progress and we delve deeper into Drunvelo's teachings, then we will actually be able to learn more about each of these. Curation show. I don't think I've heard. Who does the curation show? I'm embarrassed to say. If it's right after this show, then I can catch the beginning of it, even though it's pretty late here already. But yeah, I'm quite behind on all of these. There are lots and lots of new shows. If you're listening to this podcast anywhere, make sure you check out MSP Waves. It's mspwaves.com, right? MSP Waves, their website, and there are lots and lots of new podcasts and new shows that are coming out now. Lots of great things. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't even managed to see all of them. But yes, check it out. Exactly. MSP Waves, https mspwaves.com, and then /schedule, that's a tough one, to see all of the shows that are upcoming. And really, there are very good ones, so make sure you check it out. Okay, so next week, that was the middle of talking. So next week, we're going to be talking about the chakra system, and we're going to be talking about a little bit of the connection between the chakra system and the physical body. That's going to be a recurring theme. Drunvelo Melchizedek, and it's, obviously this is why I'm talking about it, is very, very focused on the binary side, the polar opposites. There is always the two sides to every coin, and it's very, very important to get both perspectives. And so with as many of these subjects as we can, I will attempt for us to constantly be going to the more, let's call it, hippie side of things, and then to the more scientific side of things, and see if we can't marry these damn opposites together, as was once. Because let's face it, personally, again, this is my opinion, but I think that the separation of religion, what I would term spirituality, and science has caused so much misunderstanding and incomplete answers in each of these fields. And it's a real shame, because there is so much for each of them to offer, and we really are composed, I think, of these two very distinct and opposite worlds. So this will be part of what we're attempting to do, heal the divide on all levels except racist, and really attempting to bring as many of these different, seemingly opposite worldviews into a cohesive whole that will help us ultimately understand ourselves and reality a little bit better. And I think that if we do that, we'll probably be better people for it, and we'll be able to look down on others. So what more could we possibly want, honestly? Okay, oh my gosh, I've already gone over. Thank you ever so much, all of you, for joining in chat. Oh my gosh. Archangel Gabriel, Gregory, Patrick, Patient 01, Done Revised Sociology, Swoop. This new girl, Tripod. Oh, thank you very much for joining. I didn't see when you came. And Alien Halni, as always. I have been Olev. Thank you very, very much. And I will see you all, hear you all next week. Until then, bye.